It goes to the Assembly and to the Senate. Each one of them take a look at it. And areas where they don't agree goes to what they call conference committees. And at the end, by June 15th, which is a month away, they should be sending a budget to the governor, which is essentially their budget. He only has line item details. However, the budget he issued in January was about $90 billion. And it is essentially about $15 to $20 billion less than some of the budgets that Schwarzenegger came up with. And so essentially, you know, we hear lots of talk about fraud and abuse and waste. Well, we're to the bone, and that's the truth. I think that the critical thing to remember is that 75% of that budget is already accounted for. It's either through initiatives or through requirements through federal mandates or legislation. So we can only deal with 25% of the budget. If you look at the budget categories, K-14 is the biggest one, primarily because of Prop 98, again, an initiative we passed back in 1989, I think. I can't remember. Sometime in the late 80s, early 90s, we passed Prop 98, which essentially guarantees a certain amount of money that would go to K-14. And K-14 is K-12 with a 2-year community colleges. That's about 40-something, over 40% of the budget, 42% of the budget, depending on what year we're talking about. When you add in funding for UC, for CSU, and community colleges, we're talking about 53% of the budget. The next biggest piece is Health and Human Services that runs about 35, 38% of the budget. So when we start to have, first of all, we have what we call a structural deficit, which means we do not have enough revenues to cover the expenditures that we have, and that has been going on certainly for almost the last 10 years or so. So when we talk about, you know, where are we going to cut? Well, we're going to cut Health and Human Services. Now, we do not fully fund education at this present time. They owe K-12, K-14, K-12 pretty much, essentially about $2 billion. And so at some point, the courts have already ruled they have to put that money back in. And so when we start to look at what we call the May revise, that comes in every year based on the amount of money that, you know, we as taxpayers, or most of us, I guess, as taxpayers, send in to the state. And we're running $3 billion behind. That's the reason why we have a $16 billion deficit. Now, some of the cuts, let me get my notes out, so I can tell you about some of the cuts that the governor put into his May revise. $8.3 billion in reductions to safety net programs. And so those programs are going to be Medi-Cal, they're going to be Healthy Families, they're going to be CalWorks. And we've already reduced from CalWorks, if you recall, the Welfare to Work program. That's only for people who have children primarily. And the people who are collecting that money have 48 months in order to get trained and get a job. Because at the end of that time, you're off that $600, $650, whatever the monthly stipend is. So we're losing $8.3 billion in that. In-home supportive services, many of those people providing those services look like us. And they're talking about a 7% cut across the board. Now, the Schwarzenegger, during the course of his couple of his budgets, did a 10% cut. They took it to court, and the court says, no, you cannot do that. And that's the other issue. Many of these cuts have gone to court, and the courts have ruled in, and I guess you could say in our favor, in the sense that you can't, because they look at these cuts as savings. When you look at the budget, that's exactly how they're lined out, as savings, not as cuts, but as savings. And so we essentially have to make up whatever cuts or savings that are not there. So that means when the courts ruled, they said $1.7 billion, you got to put it back into the budget. Where's that money going to come from? Where's that money going to come from? And so yes, we're up talking with the various subcommittees who will make the decisions. The Democrats, of course, rule the legislature, and they tend to listen to us. But we're moving close to June 15th. As we speak, I was supposed to, prior to agreeing to be here this morning, I was supposed to be in Senate Subcommittee 1 to speak about a fit test. And this is one of the issues that they use to test school children to determine essentially how physically fit they are. And this is one way to determine the level of obesity. We pull those kind of statistics. They're about to delete that program. And if they delete that program, then how are we going to get the resources we need to start to put in place programs and services? Because that's a policy decision. And so